In the depths of an overcast afternoon, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long, crooked shadows that danced across the peeling walls of the old Thompson house. The air felt stagnant, heavy with an unsettling silence that blanketed every corner. Clara Thompson, just 11 years old, had always found comfort in the nooks and crannies of her family's home, despite its creaky floors and chipped paint. Each room of the house told a different story, a silent witness to the lives of those who lived there before her. The walls were adorned with photographs, sepia-toned portraits of ancestors long gone, their eyes filled with secrets and whispers of days past. Yet, that day, unusual chills curled around Clara's spine, and an odd feeling settled like a stone in her chest as she wandered through the dimly lit corridors. Clara's favorite place in the house was the small library filled with books of every kind. It smelled of old paper and a hint of must, the kind of aroma that enveloped her like a warm hug. She would sit for hours, poring over stories that transported her to different worlds. A world where knights jousted and princesses waited to be saved, or one filled with talking animals and magical adventures. But today, the library felt different, almost muffled as if the very walls were holding their breath. It all started with a faint whisper, barely audible at first, coming from a door at the end of the hallway. Clara had never paid much attention to it before, it was just a door, after all. But today, something about it beckoned her forward. The door loomed at the end of the hall, dark and imposing, slightly ajar as if it had secrets to share. It stood there like a sentry, with twisted edges that seemed to mock every bit of her curiosity. What lay beyond that door? She felt an urge pulling her closer, a tug of adventure mixed with a shiver of fear that tickled her spine. The doorknob glinted in the near darkness, its surface etched with strange, tangled patterns that seemed to come alive under the weak light piercing through the thin dust that clung to everything. As she stepped closer, uneasy thoughts flickered through her mind like a restless shadow. Her mother had warned her to stay away from this door, calling it a forsaken door. Yet, despite the warning, Clara's heart beat faster with curiosity. She had always been entranced by the strange noises that bubbled forth from it at night, low, murmuring sounds that twisted her insides into knots. They felt enchanted, full of secrets just waiting to be uncovered, beckoning her closer with every soft sigh. Each passing day, those sounds grew louder, their tones whispering urgent invitations that sent her heart racing. Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the musty air, feeling her heart thump hard against her ribcage. With trembling fingers, she reached for the handle, feeling the chill of the metal seep into her skin. With a soft click, the door gave way a fraction more, creaking as if it mourned what lay on the other side. Clara peered into the darkness beyond, her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. Inside, only shadows awaited her, an emptiness that seemed to swallow the little light that dared to peek through. A wave of dread washed over her, heavy like a bag of stones. But underneath that thick layer of fear, there was an insatiable curiosity dancing, a small flame flickering inside her chest. What else could be hidden beyond that creeping shadow? The whispers intensified, clanging like a sudden storm, growing almost frenzied, as if mocking her hesitance. Clara stood paralyzed, her heart thundering in her chest, fighting against a powerful instinct to both flee and stay. In that moment, she felt as if the door itself had come alive, sensing her uncertain hesitation and pushing back against her with a strange sort of resistance. There was a force pulling her toward it, like the soft caress of an unseen hand. It was more than just a physical tug, it was an ingrained instinct, a chilling sensation plucking at the very strings of her being. Clara gasped, taking a sudden step back, feeling fear wrap around her like an icy shroud. What was this door? Why did it feel like it had a mind of its own, a darkness come to life? Her thoughts raced, and a storm of emotions flooded through her, fear, curiosity, and an intense need to understand. The very idea of the door twisted at her insides like a tangled knot, making her feel dizzy. She stumbled back and collapsed onto the floor, the chill of the wood biting into her palms. Shutting her eyes tightly, she whispered soothing words to herself, trying to convince her fluttering heart that it was just a door. An old wooden barrier leading to nothing but shadows and silence. Yet her mind battled her with wild images of lurking, monstrous shapes hiding just beyond that threshold, waiting and watching. The shadows cast by the dimming light stretched across the hallway, fluttering like dark wings. Clara could almost feel something lurking just out of sight, watching her with a predatory stare. It was silly to think that anything could actually be watching her, yet she couldn't shake the feeling. Firmly, she convinced herself to find her courage. Her spirit stoked a flame of defiance within her chest. She swore that she would unravel this mystery, standing resolute against whatever darkness loomed beyond the door. As she cautiously reached out to touch the wood again, hoping for clarity or perhaps closure, the door shuddered unexpectedly, its surface warping in a grotesque dance, pulling her in an almost blasphemous manner. Clara staggered back, horror gripping her tightly. What kind of door could twist, bend, and writhe like that? What sort of madness hovered just behind it? The whirling sounds grew louder, almost screaming for her attention, pulling her closer like hungry beasts. But Clara could feel an instinct rising in her, urging her to flee, to create distance between herself and this unholy portal. Just as she turned to run, she caught a flicker of movement from the corner of her eye. Something shifted within the shadows of the room, a shape just beyond the threshold. Her heart skipped a beat, and her breathing quickened. Clara took several steps back, nearly stumbling over her own feet, her eyes never leaving that door. It felt as though the air itself had thickened, wrapping around her like a tight scarf, making it hard to breathe. Every part of her screamed to escape, to leave this sinister door behind, yet she felt rooted to the spot as the whispers reached a crescendo. At that moment, with the weight of fear and intrigue battling within her, a thought struck her, a revelation. Could this door hide more than just darkness? What if it was a gateway to discovery, to an adventure unlike any she had ever known? Clara's imagination flooded with visions of what might lie behind it. Enchanted treasures, hidden worlds, or perhaps a long-lost secret about her family's history. What could possibly be calling her? Drawing upon every ounce of bravery she possessed, she took a tentative step forward. With her hand trembling, she grasped the doorknob once more, feeling its cold, metallic surface against her skin. A bittersweet thrill coursed through her veins, igniting a sense of determination against the lure of fear that still clung to her. She knew she couldn't back down now. There was no turning away from the mystery. She had to know what lay behind the forsaken door that had always piqued her curiosity. As she turned the knob, the darkness beyond whispered her name, a gentle entreaty that sent a shiver up her spine. Clara hesitated for a brief moment, the shadows swirling in a way that felt almost alive. She held her breath, her heart a wild drum in her chest. Then, summoning the courage she had found within herself, she pushed the door fully open. The creaking hinges protested loudly, echoing through the silence like a warning bell, yet in her heart, Clara felt the spark of adventure. She stepped inside, not knowing if she would find treasure or terror, but knowing that her life would never be the same again as she crossed the threshold. Days flew by like shadows gliding over the moonlit sky, yet the door remained an unyielding presence in Clara's life. Every day that passed felt like another piece of glass slipping through her fingers. The world around her shifted, becoming more strange and unfamiliar. She felt like a tiny boat tossed about on a wild sea of confusion, while the noises behind the door twisted into something dark and unsettling. Clara dared not approach it again. The whispers crept into her mind, wrapping themselves around her thoughts like a heavy, gray fog. They called her name softly yet chillingly, coaxing her back with their low, guttural tones that seemed to echo in the empty spaces of her heart. Her parents were often lost in their own lives, so caught up in their daily routines that they hardly noticed the changes happening to Clara. Her mother would come home each day, weary from her job, her eyes clouded with fatigue and exhaustion. Sighing deeply, she would collapse into her chair, scrolling mindlessly through her phone, unaware of the shadows creeping into their home. Her father, too, appeared distant, his thoughts lost somewhere far away. He often stared blankly at the walls, his mind occupied by worries that Clara could not understand. They were both blind to the darkness blooming in their once bright home. Clara felt only a heavy isolation. The photographs hanging on the walls seemed to shift, their smiles frozen in place like sentinels, each gaze appearing to follow her with an unsettling awareness, their once cheery faces now twisted into eerie grins. One fateful night, when the clock on the wall ticked loudly in the stillness of the dark, Clara found herself wide awake. The room felt heavy, oppressive, as though a thick blanket of dread hung in the air. It was a sensation that prickled at the back of her neck and made her heart quicken. Once more, the door seemed to call her name, the whispers stitching themselves into the fabric of her thoughts, entwining into her dreams and dragging her back toward the unknown. Clara could feel the house itself seemed to come alive around her. The floorboards creaked, the shadows stretched, and every little sound echoed ominously in the silence. Heart racing, she swung her legs over the side of her bed, allowing determination to surge through her. Why should I fear what I do not understand? She thought bravely. Maybe there are answers hiding behind that door, waiting for me. With that courage bolstering her resolve, Clara tiptoed down the dimly lit hall. Each small step sent shivers racing up her spine as excitement mingled with fear. The air was cool against her skin, and the shadows danced playfully around her like mischievous sprites, whispering secrets she yearned to hear. As she neared the door, its very presence seemed to grow larger, as if it recognized her approach. The whispers faded into a cloying silence, swallowing the sounds of the house until everything felt muted. Finally standing before the door, it appeared even worse than before. Its edges were bent and warped, the wood twisted into grotesque patterns that squirmed and coiled like dark worms upon the surface. The door seemed to breathe, pulsating slightly as Clara's hand hovered near it. A profound sense of unease washed over her. She felt as though the door would devour her whole if she lingered too long. But Clara was determined. Summoning all her courage, she raised her hand and pressed it against the cool, rough surface of the door. This time, to her surprise, there was no resistance. It opened slowly with a creaking sound that echoed deeply, revealing nothing but a churning darkness that beckoned her closer like a yawning mouth of an ancient monster. The air that wafted out was thick with the sense of decay and dampness, twisting her stomach violently. Yet, an unholy curiosity anchored her feet, pulling her deeper into the gloom. With a deep breath fortifying her spirit, Clara stepped inside. The darkness enveloped her like a heavy cloak, pressing against her body, making it hard to breathe. It felt alive, pulsating around her, almost as if it were watching. She steeled herself against her racing heart, determined to seek out the source of the whispers that had haunted her thoughts. What awaited her within this lost space? The shadows danced menacingly, flickering like the candlelight in a forgotten chapel. Then, she heard it, the whispers returned, low and prolonged. They seemed to fill the room, wrapping around her like a shroud. Join us, here forever? The words entwined themselves through the murky depths, pulling at the very heart of her being with each chilling syllable. Panic swelled within her chest, but an odd fascination kept her rooted in place. It was a desperate invitation, twisting in her gut like a cold snake. This was not an ordinary room. Clara felt it in her bones. It was a nightmare given form, a realm ruled by something grotesque and terrible. The shadows seemed to elongate, reaching for her like ghostly fingers yearning to pull her into the depths. Clara's resolve began to crumble as the depths of despair clawed at her insides. I need to go, she whispered to herself, panic threatening to spill over. The darkness loomed around her, and she turned to leave, but to her horror, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. The room spun violently, an eerie transformation unfolding before her confused eyes. Walls bulged and twisted, grotesque faces emerging from their surfaces, their mouths moving in silent screams that echoed in her ears. Help us! The disembodied voices pulsed from the shadows as though they were alive, tugging desperately at her heartstrings. Clara could feel the weight of her fear pressing down like an ever-tightening vice. The darkness deepened, swallowing her whole, but she felt an intangible thread connecting her spirit to this strange, malignant realm, as if something within the abyss craved her very essence. No, you can't take me, she screamed, her voice a desperate cry echoed by the vast emptiness. Panic surged through her, each heartbeat a reminder of her mortality. She frantically pressed her palms against the warped wood of the door behind her, searching for a way to escape. But it was unyielding, solid as stone, and Clara felt despair claw at her throat. In that moment of fear, the voices whispered again, but now they formed a clearer message, a chilling promise wrapped in false hope. Stay with us, dear Clara, you will never be alone. Tears burned in Clara's eyes as images began to unfurl in her mind, stark and vivid. She could see shadows of other children, faces twisted in sorrow and longing. They reached out to her, their forms blurring into the dark surroundings. Help us come home. Help us escape the darkness, they pleaded, their voices blending into a chilling chant that echoed endlessly. Clara's heart sank, and the walls closed in around her, threatening to crush whatever remained of her bravery. The grotesque faces painted on the walls seemed to shift and change, twisting into a reflection of her deepest fears. She felt their suffering, and as she looked into their hollow eyes, she sensed their desperation and pain, begging for release from a torment she could not comprehend. But Clara knew deep within her that she couldn't succumb to this darkness. She had to fight. She had to find a way back to the light. Spinning around, she clenched her fists and screamed with all her might, "I won't stay. I will not be part of this." Her voice rang out, reverberating in the air, challenging the shadows that loomed before her. Suddenly, the air shifted, a crack of light breaking through the enveloping darkness. It illuminated the grotesque faces and made them shrink back, recoiling as if they were afraid of the light. Hope ignited within Clara. Perhaps this was her chance. With every ounce of strength, she flung herself toward the door, heart pounding wildly in her chest. As she reached out her hand, she felt the warmth of the light brushing against her fingertips. The door was just within reach, a promise of safety and freedom. But as she grasped the handle and pulled, the voices cried out in anguish, their haunting moans swelling like a fierce wind. The darkness thrashed around her, trying to pull her back into its embrace. "Please, let me go," Clara shouted defiantly, but she could feel the weight of despair threatening to drag her down. With one final, Herculean effort, she yanked the door wide open, plunging her into blinding light. Gasping, Clara tumbled back into her own room, collapsing onto her bed. The darkness, the whispers, all faded away, leaving only the soft ticking of the clock and the gentle sound of her own breath. She breathed in deeply, trembling from the experience as reality settled back into place. The door was just a door again, an old, wooden door that needed a fresh coat of paint. It held no more secrets, no more whispers. For now, she had escaped. But in the depths of her heart, Clara knew that the presence behind that door had not simply vanished. It lingered, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment she might dare to return. And as she lay in bed, a tremor of uncertainty crept into her mind. The adventure had not ended, it had only just begun. After that harrowing night, Clara could hardly sleep. The door had become a dark specter haunting her thoughts, lurking in the shadows of her mind, infiltrating her dreams with unsettling visions. Grotesque figures danced around her, their eyes gleaming with insatiable hunger, and she could feel their cold breaths chilling her to the bone. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind was a reminder of her curiosity, a constant echo urging her closer to the unknown. That door was like a siren's song, mesmerizing and alluring, pulling her in every time she dared to glance its way. The dread coiled thickly in her chest, a serpent ready to strike. She knew she should stay away, but the door had grown into a part of her existence. It became a challenge, a puzzle that begged to be solved, even as shadows danced within its confines, writhing in an unholy delight, as if they reveled in her terror. Clara felt like a fragile thread, fraying, tethered too close to an abyss that called to her. In her little house, life went on. The sun rose and fell, time marched forward, but Clara felt stuck. Her attempts to confide in her parents were met with indifference. "Oh, Clara, you're just being silly," her mother would say, brushing off her fears like dust. Clara's mother often told her tales of childhood fears, long-forgotten stories with happy endings, but Clara felt they didn't understand. Her father would stare blankly at his phone, trying to reply to a text, as if the words were more important than the strange door shadowing their home. Nobody seemed to care about the dark mystery lurking just beyond their walls. As summer days stretched on, Clara felt the isolation deepening into desperation. Days turned into weeks, each one a slow crawl filled with the weight of fear she could not shake off. It felt as if her sanity was fraying, like a moth drawn towards a flame, even as she fought to protect herself from the warmth that promised to consume her. Every time she thought she could ignore it, the otherwise peaceful surroundings would taunt her, reminding her of the door's grotesque shape looming in the back of her mind. One evening, illuminated by a moonlight that sliced through her window, Clara lay wide awake in her bed, staring up at the ceiling. The moonlight painted silver streaks across her room like magic, but she couldn't feel its calm. Sleep was impossible. She tossed and turned, feeling a compulsion that grew stronger with every passing second. She could no longer keep her distance. The unsettling urge had transformed into a potent need, a pull that urged her to uncover the truth. With a deep breath, Clara slipped out of bed and tiptoed through the dark hallway, the floorboards creaking softly beneath her bare feet. Each step felt electric, tinged with both fear and excitement. The shadows in the house seemed to shift and sway around her, but Clara held her breath, channeling every ounce of bravery she could muster. As she neared the twisted door, her heart raced, thump thump, thump thump, each beat resonating with her pounding fears. The moonlight spilled into the hallway like ethereal fingers, caressing the surface of the door. The carvings twisted and spiraled into chaos, telling stories of nightmares long forgotten. Trembling, her hand unsteadily reached for the doorknob, pulling it closer as if it held all the answers she sought. But what answers lay beyond? Clara felt an unshakable sense of foreboding settle in her stomach. With a mix of trepidation and exhilaration, Clara gripped the doorknob, feeling it warm beneath her palm. The moment she twisted it, a violent shudder reverberated through the frame, as if the door were alive. A pulse of sinister energy shot up her arm, sending shockwaves through her very core. It was terrifying yet thrilling, a strange union of two feelings colliding into one heartbeat. Whispers began to rise, swirling around her like a fog, pulling her in. "We are waiting for you," they beckoned, their guttural tones scraping against her mind, echoing like a haunting melody that danced around her. The door swung open with a force that could only be described as unholy. Clara stumbled inside, the threshold slamming shut behind her with a finality that sent a cold shiver down her spine. The vast emptiness of the space engulfed her, shadows swirling around her like a dark sea, forming shapes that twisted and contorted into grotesque figures, their forms an unsettling ballet of despair. Clara felt the intoxicating dread course through her veins, and each step deeper into the abyss felt like stepping further away from reality. Laughter echoed in her ears, a demoniac sound that chilled her to her very soul. Panic flooded her veins, and Clara tried to escape, but the more she fought, the more the shadows clung to her body, their touch like cold serpents wrapping tightly around her. "Stay with us," they hissed, their voices a whispering wind, beckoning in a way that both terrified and thrilled her. For the first time, Clara felt despair mingling with a strange sense of exhilaration, like a roller coaster racing downwards. Waves of fear crashed against her mind, transforming into a blinding light that made her feel as if she could conquer anything. As Clara moved deeper into the dark expanse, she caught glimpses of visions swirling behind the shadows. Faces she recognized began to take shape, people long lost from her life or who had faded away over time. They loomed closer, their features warped with distorted expressions, mouths moving in silent screams as if reaching out for help. Pleading eyes met hers, and she felt their pain wash over her like a tidal wave. It became increasingly clear that she was not alone in this twisted nightmare. The lost souls lingered, watching, waiting. They all shared the same chilling fate. In that moment, resignation washed over her heart like a heavy fog. Clara understood she could never leave this realm. The door had claimed her, wrapping her tightly in its cursed embrace. She was now part of its sinister tapestry, woven into a story fraught with despair. The walls seemed to close in, shifting and changing around her, and the cacophony of voices rose to a frantic crescendo, pulling Clara into a whirlpool of hopelessness. Nothing more mattered. She was trapped, tangled within the malevolent web the door had spun for her. Time slipped away, consumed by the shadows dancing with glee. Clara felt their anticipation, their desire for her to join them in their eternal suffering. She wanted to scream, to shake herself free, but the fear wrapped around her heart, squeezing tighter, making it hard to breathe. The shadows whispered sweet promises, like honeyed words coating her senses but laced with poisonous thorns. "Stay with us, Clara," they beckoned, "you'll never have to be alone again." But she could still remember her home, the warmth of her bed, and the love that filled the halls. Somewhere, deep down, Clara fought against their embrace. She recalled her father's laugh and her mother's knitting needles clicking together in a soft rhythm. Those memories contrasted sharply with the swirling darkness around her. The lost souls could not have her light, they would not take away her hope. Clara's mind raced. "I will find a way," she thought fiercely, summoning an inner strength she didn't know she possessed. Although the shadows clung to her, wrapping tighter like vines around her, Clara took a shaky breath, feeling the familiar warmth of determination flicker within her. She would not give in to despair. Even here, in this dark void where hope seemed distant, she could fight. She started walking, pushing through the fog of darkness. The whispers grew louder, desperate and angry at her refusal, but Clara pressed on. Vision blurred, and she could feel panic starting to creep in. "I will find a way back," she repeated to herself like a mantra, her voice brave and unwavering even as the shadows howled in protest. Suddenly, Clara saw a flicker of light in the distance, an invitation, a promise of escape. Drawing closer, she could almost feel its warmth against her skin, and it gave her the strength to carry on. The light spread like golden ribbons around her, cutting through the darkness, pushing the shadows back, and she felt the weight on her heart begin to lift. But the shadows were relentless, screeching now, pulling at her clothes, her very essence. "Come back, Clara," they cried, their voices twisted with rage. "You belong to us." Each step toward the light felt like a battle, and Clara leaned into the memory of her home, the faces of her family lighting the path ahead. Just a little further, she told herself. The pain of loss and despair began to fade as the light enveloped her, wrapping her in its warmth. Finally, as she stepped into the radiant glow, a sense of freedom washed over her. The voices receded, no longer the deafening roar of shadows but whispers in the wind, almost gentle now. Clara felt her heart swell. She had escaped the darkness that threatened to consume her. In that moment, Clara realized something profound. Even in the depths of despair, hope could shine brighter than any shadow, and she had the power to choose her own destiny. The echo of the door still lingered in her mind, but she could face that challenge. She had conquered her fear by embracing her strength. With renewed resolve, she turned away from the memories of the door, ready to return to her life, armed with the understanding that she could never again be a prisoner to her own despair. Stepping back into the warmth of her home, Clara felt the shadows fall behind her, retreating into the dark corners of her mind as sunlight streamed in through the window. The door still stood within the house, a part of her journey, but it was no longer a thing of terror. The whispers had quieted, and Clara knew she had a story to tell, one filled with courage, hope, and the promise of brighter days ahead. With each beat of her heart, she vowed never to forget, but to live brightly, to echo the laughter and warmth of her family within the walls of her home. Days turned into weeks, and Clara lost all sense of time. In the beginning, she would glance at the tiny window in the corner of the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of sunlight, but with each passing day, she noticed how the light barely eked through the dusty glass. Her presence in this cursed room became routine. She had once filled the space with thoughts of escape and freedom, but now those ideas seemed distant, like faded memories locked in a treasure chest that she could no longer reach. The whispers within the room felt intoxicatingly familiar, wrapping around her like a thick fog that settled in her mind, making it hard to think straight. Clara's mother's voice faded deeper and deeper into the shadows of her memory. She tried to remember the sweet lullabies her mother used to sing, but they turned into nothing more than echoes, floating away like whispers in the wind, leaving her feeling cold and alone. The warmth of her home evaporated like mist at dawn, disappearing without a trace. What remained was a twisted cacophony that surrounded her, a mixture of sorrowful cries and laughter that rang out loud and chaotic, keeping her dizzy and lost. The shadows had twined around her, forming an unbreakable bond with her existence. They harmonized with her very being until she hardly felt anything at all. The clamorous demands from the shadows slipped into her thoughts, relentlessly calling her to join them. At first, it terrified her, filling her heart with dread, but in time, she found comfort in their overwhelming presence. Clara had become a phantom herself, drifting among the cursed spirits trapped forever by the unholy door. Moments from her life, once bright and joyful, replayed in her mind like a long, tangled string of colorful yarn, now frayed and twisted, growing more grotesque the longer she was ensnared. When she had first encountered the grotesque forms of the shadows, they had terrified her. Their jagged edges seemed like claws ready to pounce, and their eerie whispers chilled her to her very bones. The darkness once held mysteries that sent shivers down her spine, but now those feelings had dulled. She had lost sight of who she had been, and what had come of that brave girl who used to fear the very door that now loomed over her like a dark cloud. The laughter and cries of her previous life had faded into the background, devoured by the suffocating darkness that surrounded her. Even the photographs that had adorned the walls of the Thompson house flickered in her mind like broken pieces of glass, mere fragments of a living memory, and they too twisted away into shadow. "Forever with us?" the shadows kept repeating, clawing at her thoughts, soft and sinister. They caressed her fear as though it were a fragile thread, pulling it taut until she could hardly breathe. Clara realized she had done this all by herself. She had chosen to step through the door and abandon the light, a moment that promised freedom but delivered unholy unity with the darkness. Still, a small part of her resisted, quietly lamenting her choice in that vast, empty room. Was this really what she wanted? Her old friend Dolores, with whom she had tackled school projects, and the boy next door, their innocent faces melded and twisted into eternal shadows, now taunted her, cloaking her heart with sadness. Every victim that drifted into this murky fate became an echo of Clara's identity, collecting around her in the foreboding walls of her prison. Inside the room, the shadows danced in excitement, reveling in her despair. The cackles of the shadows rose above the suffocating whispers. "You are ours now," they chanted, their voices intertwining to create a haunting choir of betrayal. Each word dripped with dark glee, echoing off the walls, filling the desolate space with a sense of inescapable fate. Within that frighteningly empty room, Clara found herself haunted by a dreadful understanding. She was now irrevocably tied to this place, a mere pawn in the wicked game played by unseen forces beyond her comprehension. Thoughts of rescue disappeared. Hope slipped through her fingers like grains of sand. The darkness became a ravenous beast, drinking in her essence, pulling her deeper into its endless abyss. Clara longed to scream, her heart racing like a wild horse galloping down a path. She wanted to break free from the horrors that ensnared her and fill the empty room with her voice again, yet when she opened her mouth to cry out, no sound emerged. It was as though an eerie silence filled the room, wrapping itself around her heart and squeezing until pain bloomed wide and heavy. There was no path to her escape. The distorted door had warped beyond recognition, masking the once clear line between reality and nightmare. Time twisted grotesquely around her, marking her demise with long, dripping strokes of despair that stained the walls as if they bled. The whispers of lost souls fused together, chanting an ominous hymn that echoed like a sickly lullaby, pulling Clara further into the malevolent depths that surrounded her. The shadows beckoned her, swirling around her wildly, their ghostly fingers weaving through her thoughts, trying to construct a grotesque version of her identity. "Join us in our pain, share our burden," they echoed, their call resonating deep within her heart. It filled her with a petrifying sense of belonging, as if she were finally being accepted into a strange new family, one built on shared sorrow and shadows. With each passing moment, Clara's last shreds of her former self began to fade, consumed by the ravenous tide of darkness that threatened to drown her. She found herself surrendering, giving into the shadows while seeking comfort in their twisted embrace. As she leaned further into that abyss, she could feel herself becoming more and more like them, distant, a bit hollow, and forever changed. With those warped boundaries around her, she knew she would never know the joys of laughter again. The memory of riding her bike down the quiet street, feeling the wind dance against her face, seemed like a dream from another life. The sweet warmth of her mother's embrace was now just a ghost of a memory, an ache in her heart that would never be fulfilled. Clara had stepped through the twisted door, sealing her fate, forever lost in the cursed abyss of her own making. Each memory that slipped away tied her tighter to the darkness, solidifying her final tether to the world that had once felt so bright and full of hope. She wanted to grasp onto the threads of her old life, to remember the love that once surrounded her, but it all consumed her. The door itself seemed to smile grotesquely, its edges curling like the corners of a cruel grin, while shadows inside rejoiced in the chaos they had created. Clara felt her essence slip through her fingertips, replaced by an overwhelming sense of numbness, and with that, she was silenced forever. She had been swallowed whole by the malevolent design crafted by the unfathomable depths of the twisted door. As Clara drifted deeper into the shadows, she slowly began to understand what it was to be a part of this strange, forlorn family. Their pain was collective. It bound them together in a way that nothing else could. The spirits told stories, and despite their terror, Clara felt drawn to listen. They recounted tales of their lives, filled with laughter, love, and dreams that had all vanished when they succumbed to the door. In this dreadful harmony, Clara found herself both terrified and comforted. She began to accept her fate, relishing the tales of woe, understanding the bond formed through shared suffering. Though she lost herself in the darkness, Clara hoped that somewhere, in the caverns of her mind, a flicker of light would remain, waiting for the moment of rescue. But as the days stretched into weeks, that flicker grew dimmer, overshadowed by the seductive lullabies of the shadows. The depth of her despair intertwined with the warmth of acceptance, two forces battling within her. The cursed room became a strange home, and Clara, the phantom child, floated among ghosts forever lost, endlessly bound to the ambiguous dance of darkness and sorrow.